Hello, my name is Rob Garner. I'm a computer programming instructor, and today I'm going to demonstrate building a Blazor application with the Maui Blazor page site with it as well, so that we'll have a WebAssembly front end, a Web API back end, and then Maui that will give us a phone app and a PC app all in one solution with all these projects laid out and reusing as many components as possible. So to do this, I'm going to start up Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to pick I'm going to start off with a WebAssembly app because it kind of gives me most of the components. And I'm going to call this my app. And I'm building this actually to build myself a place where I can hang some automation. And I don't want it to be too associated with anything in particular because basically I want to just have it available when I want an application or something. Some of it is driven by I haven't found a podcast app I like, and haven't found a phone app that works well in my car, and I kind of have some data things that I'd like to be able to do, and some day-to-day task type of things I'd like to do that having a web-based data driven application would be kind of nice. So I'm just going to make my generic app. And so I'm going to pick the long-term support version. It kind of makes sense since this is the latest and also the long-term support, so it kind of makes sense to pick that. I could pick individual accounts, but the book we're using in the current course I'm teaching actually has us putting authentication in later, so I'm going to do that just to see how that works. Part of the reason I'm doing this is to try different things out too. I'm going to make it a car-hosted application, which is going to give me a WebAssembly backend with this Blazor app. And I'm not going to do PWA because I'm going to be bringing in a Maui app. A progressive web app provides you, basically an app type feel to a web. Well, I'm going to have an app, so I don't need this. And I'm not going to use top-level statements. That's the latest thing they've done in .NET 6, where on the top level page they omit all the a lot of the namespace statements and things like that. I kind of used to seeing them, so I'm going to just not use them. I may go to that one day, but right now I think I'd rather my pages all look the same rather than having my program.cs page look a little different, and then I have to remember that that's different. So here we go. We have a client app, a server app, a shared app. I'm going to close out some of these overview pages, and I'm going to just go ahead and run it with Control F5 just to make sure that it's operating. Okay, so it succeeded, and let's see. I've got my server running, and I've got my page. It's functioning. So, all right. Everything came through all right. So the next thing I need to do is I need to work with my data, and I could do this using. We have actually. Let's see, under shared, we have classes here, but we're going to make a data folder to work with our data. And so I'm going to right click on here and add a new project. Actually, let's do this with the console. So I'm going to, let's do this. Let's open up a terminal. and I'm going to .NET new a class library and call it my app .data. Let's see where that ended up. Yeah, so it ended up in a folder called my app.data, and let's take a look at what that looks like. And that's fine. It's in its own little folder here. I think what I wanted, but I noticed that these are all in theirs like this. So I think what I can do is move this folder into my app. I suppose I could have made it there. And then rename this so that it's here. And now it's at the same level. They don't do this in the book that we're following in class, but I think that would work okay. Just to keep the symmetry of this folder structure. And then we need to add it to our solution. You don't see it in the solution yet because if you were to actually look at the solution file, you would see that it lists the server, the client, and the shared app, but it doesn't have the other ones. So there's a couple ways to fix that. We could right-click on the solution and add existing item, existing project, and go in here and pick this, and that would add it. You can also do that here in the, let's do a directory to see where it is. Yeah, well, there's my app. We could say .NET solution add, and it's going to be, we need to specify the directory, so my app / my app .data . Yeah, just like that. Let's see. Well, just do that. Maybe I misspelled things. My app. Nope. Let's look at what the directory looks like. Oh, it's just data. Okay. So I need to go back up to the solution folder, and then where I made my mistake was this is data. All right, let's get this sorted out. My app. My app. Okay, it's my app dot. That should be just that. Okay, so it's my app data. Okay, well, if it gets difficult because command line, let's just add existing project and go to data and just do that. And there it is. You lose cool points by not being able to do command line, get the command line to work, but then you don't want to spend 15 minutes trying to figure out where things are in the directory structure. So there it is. So now we have that, and then let's look at the solution file and where that ended up. You don't have to. Normally, especially if you're just if you're just adding things quickly, you don't have to do this, but you don't have to constantly look at the solution file. But I kind of like to see where things end up, just to make sure that I'm getting a clean solution file. That looks different. Oh, I haven't saved the solution file, so let's save all and then go look at the solution file. There we go. And I'm looking to see if this ended up looking the same as those other projects. And part of this is that if I built everything from scratch, this would all be the same. But since I'm building this off of an existing template, I kind of want what I add to be symmetrical to the other templates, and this ended up this way. The way the book does it, you end up with a myblog.data folder parallel to another folder, and that's fine, but it just I just think it makes it nice to have this folder structure clean, and then these to be clean, and then there's my project. So if you're wondering why are you going through all this trouble, you just add it and it's good. I think that having these look symmetrical is helpful in the long run. Okay, so now we've got our data project, and in this project, then the next thing we want to do is add some NuGet packages, and so we'll need to be in that data folder. So again, using cd change directory and make sure I'm in the right place. And then I'm going to add Microsoft.entity framework core tools. So that's going to add up in here. I can see and actually, yeah, if you have you'll see these packages start showing up in your project, this full file. And then I'm going to .NET add package and I'm going to be using Sqlite. I like Sqlite. It's lightweight, and when you deploy it to a service provider, they don't charge you anything for it typically. So because it's just software, it's not a server-driven application. So if you're making small things like this, it makes sense to use Sqlite. And so, it's actually a serious database tool. It's not a toy. Okay, so we've got Sqlite in there, and we've got Entity Framework Core tools. That's what we're going to need to be able to do our Entity Framework stuff. So that's good. I'm going to save this, save everything. I have my data project started. And let's see, what could I build first? You know, I think I am going to build a blog just like I did there. We'll be doing other things, but I need a blog, and so it makes sense to start with that. So I'm going to take this class, and actually I can just edit this class. I'm going to rename it to well, actually, yeah, no, I'll just delete this. So we start clean, and then we're going to add a new folder for interfaces, and I'm going to add an interface class, and call it and they call it my blog item. But the thing is that this is I'm going to do things a little bit differently in this one because I'm building this out for a larger application. And so you can look at the demo in class to see what I did with the book demo, but I'm actually going to call this one data item. And the reason is that with this class, what data item is going to require is just that you have an ID field. So that you know, basically what this says is that I am a data item. The only thing that it's going to require is an ID field. And I'm going to make one additional change, is that since I am anticipating having a MAUI front end on this that may be disconnected from the database at certain periods, I'm going to go with GUIDs instead of an integer. So I'm going to make my ID field be a string. So your ID fields can be strings or they can be ints, but sometimes but what we're going to see is when you're working with disconnected databases, which may be having items created either on the database end or on the front end, the way to go is with a generalized unique ID. And then in here, I'm going to add a class. Oh, no, not in my interfaces. I need a models folder. So under data, I'm going to add a new folder called models. And in here, we're going to add a class, and I'm going to call this one blog item. Or actually blog post. My blog post is going to be an iData item, and that means that we need to have an ID and we'll put in the standard blog type things. We also need these other classes as well. Okay, so we've got a tag, which has a collection of blog posts. We have a category, which has a collection of blog posts. We have a blog post, which has a category and a collection of tags. So interfaces in our models, and then we need a DB context, and that's just going to be a class at the top level of let's see, is there a shortcut key for creating classes? Create class. Let's see what happens if we hit Control-Shift-A. Yeah, it gets us there faster, I think. Now, in the other demonstration, we called it my blog DB context, but this is more generic application, so I'm going to call it application DB context, which is a more generic name, and is also the name that if you look at the templates that Microsoft makes, they typically call it application DB context. And this is going to inherit from the DB context class from the Entity Framework library. We have to add a using director for Entity Framework Core, and then we need a constructor. And this constructor we're going to use dependency injection, i.e. we're going to make it's a fancy word for we're going to put in the constructor, we're going to pass in the starting context for this, and since this inherits from DB context needs this context that's being passed in. So we will chain to the base class constructor here and pass that context in. And that's really all that constructor for this does. And then here we're going to add our DB sets. DB sets are basically tables are going to become tables in our database, and we're going to use the models that we just created here to create that. So we need a blog post, and typically we just call it whatever the model is, plural. So blog posts. And this basically defines, from an entity framing perspective, our database. We have 3 tables right now with 3 models. And in addition to an application DB context, we're going to create a factory to actually create these. And this used to be we just passed around the application DB context directly, but that has a lot of stuff in it. And that can take up a lot of memory. So instead, what we do is we create a and actually I kind of want that lower b to be lowercase to follow the standard naming conventions for C#, application DB context, and this one would be application DB context factory, and it's going to inherit from I design time DB context factory of, and then we put in the name of our application DB context. And we need to implement this interface, which means it needs a create DB context method. It's got to make sense. We would the whole purpose of this is to construct our application DB context. So to construct this, we're going to actually use this to build our application DB context. So we build this options builder with an S typically. Options builder object, and that's how we tell Entity Framework we want to use Sqlite. There's actually multiple databases you can use. You can actually bring in with NuGet packages different providers for different databases. We're going to use Sqlite. And we're going to put in I'm going to call it my app DB, all lowercase. And I don't want DB, so I'll say my app.db. So that's my database. And this will end up in the whatever the context of this application is going to run, and we'll have my app.db. And let's see, what else are we missing? Sure, why not? Oh wait, no. I don't want to do that. Okay, so we have our options builder, and then we're going to return a new application DB context with this options builder. So this application, so here we're instantiating one of these, and we are passing in this list of options, which comes in here with, and I don't like the word context here. Actually, this isn't context, this is options. So I'm going to rename this options, because I think this is a better name for it. Because these are options, these aren't contexts, these are options. So we're passing in this options. It's giving us some null warnings, no non-nullable property. They're saying these are non-nullable, but it's non-nullable. And we could do things by making these nullable like that, and that would maybe remove that, but it just passes the error down, and so we're not going to worry about that. The other way we can get rid of that non-null error is, let's see, we don't have it here, that's fine. Yeah, we just have it up here. Or did we? Yeah, so we could actually make these nullable. Do I want to make it, do I want to require category, or do I want to not require category? Yeah, I don't think it should have to have a category. So I'm going to make, by putting these question marks in here, these make these nullable fields. The ID, I think I'm going to be required. And so, and again, they didn't do these with here, but I am going to make these nullable. That means they can have the value null. Like, can I have a tag without any blog posts? Sure, why not? I mean, maybe you're just adding a tag to be used later. So let's make that nullable. The ID field, I think, needs to be non-nullable, and then we need some way of maybe initializing this at the beginning. And so to fix that, maybe what I'll do is I'll do this. I'll say, you know what, I'm going to have an interface, but I'm also going to have a base class that implements that interface. And since I'm using goods, we need to look up C# create a GUID. And the way we get a GUID is we do this. And the GUID is actually a type. And we just want the string representation of it. Actually, I could make this GUID, but I think it's with Entity Framework, it's going to be easier just to make it. And so this will, and essentially it's a random string of characters. So when I create this in a toString, this will create a new GUID. It's going to assign it to here. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, let's make this base class, data item base, that implements iData item, and so then we can use that so that we don't have to do this everywhere. We can now just say, you know what, rather than doing that, let's just implement data item base here. I don't need to put the ID field here because now that's actually being implemented by this base class. And so all of these can then just get rid of that and just use that base class. And it will take care of the ID field for all of these items. So what I've done is I've just said, you know what, I don't want to do this I've been, here I am repeating myself with the ID field. I'll just make a base item, a base class that does that for me and actually initializes it with something. And that should take care of all of my initialization of my ID fields whenever I create a new item. Now it does mean that it could create some issues because if I do that, it does mean that even when I instantiate a new one, it will have a new GUID with it, and I won't be able to tell that there is that this is a new item. So maybe that's not a great idea, because what ends up happening is that it looks like it's already in the database, or sometimes what you do is you use the ID field being set to indicate that it's actually been added to the database. So maybe another thing I could do is I could just do this. I could just make it be an empty string, and I could say that if it's got an empty string, it's not if it's got an empty string, it means that it's brand new. It hasn't been added to the database yet. And I could make the rule be that when the item is added to the database, that that's when we will add the GUID. And if it has a GUID, it means it's been added. So that might be a better rule set to do. So we'll get the ID field from here. They'll start off with an empty string. And now, if we go back up to our application DB context, we're still not going to be able to get rid of this because we would have to instantiate it here. And we could new one up at this point to get rid of that. But we generally don't do that here. So I think we're going to leave this for now. So we've got our blog posts. We've got all of our models inheriting from data item base. It implements this iData item requirement to have an ID field. It takes care of it for all of our models, and we have an application DB context. The application DB context then also has a factory which will actually we'll use to actually create our application context when we need them. So I'm going to close these out. And now we need to create a migration. So to create our migration, let's open up a terminal. On the solution folder. And we need to install the tooling for that. So .NET tool install global EF will install Entity Framework tools that we can use to create our migrations. Okay, it's already installed. And then we are going to say .NET Entity Framework EF migrations add initial migration. You can name these whatever you want. The first one typically has the word initial in it somewhere. Oh, we need to actually be in the data directory, so we'll change directory to data. First my app, and then data. So we're in the right one, and then we will redo that command. So we had to be in this directory. Notice that this adds a migrations folder now to our app data, and we're going to get a couple things. One is a couple classes are built. Here's the initial migration class, and what it's doing is it's looking at our application DB context, and based on our application DB context, which has these DB sets here, the Entity Framework migration tool actually builds our migration for us. And so you notice that there's 3 create tables. There's categories, there's blog posts, and there's tags. But in addition, because there's some, because we have relationships between the different models. Let's take a look at our models here. If you'll notice that category, for example, has a one-to-many relationship with blog posts because of these collection classes, and tag, same thing. And if you look at blog posts, a blog post is related to a category and also has a relation to multiple tags. Because of that, then we need our database to create some foreign key relationships. And that's what's going on here. We can see we have a primary key being made, or we have a constraint being created between the blog posts and the categories. And we have a blog post tag table being created to create to make a relation between the blog post and tags. And so Entity Framework figures that out and figures out how to create your tables for you. So once we have that, though, now we need the database to be created. And actually, what we're going to do first is that's the work to create the underlying database. We now need a way programmatically to get to this data, and the way we do that is we create an API or so this diagram kind of illustrates what we're doing with the repository pattern. And basically the repository pattern is a way of putting in these layers of classes in order to abstract away the complexity of talking to the database. The other purpose of a repository is that by putting in these repositories, and they sometimes, in the book that we're using in class, they call them APIs. I prefer the word repository because I think it's more accurate. These classes are really designed so that if you wanted to change the type of database you're using, you would only have to change your application DB context. These repositories, and maybe these repository classes, but when you start working with the data, everything from there on is the same. So you're going to see this pattern a lot, or this principle, in a number of methodologies for programming, where we put a layer of classes in that hide the complexity of what's going on underneath. So let's take a look at, so we have our models and we have this application DB context, which is in there. And so we need to start building our repo classes. And so we're going to need a folder. And actually, we're going to start off with our interfaces. And the first interface we're going to do, well, in the book, they kind of they do one interface with all three of these classes in it. I'm going to actually break this out. I'm going to add a interface for each one, just to show you a slightly different way on how this works, and to kind of simplify maybe what's going on a little bit. And so I'm going to, rather than making, well, actually, yeah, so I'm going to make an let me make sure I know what I'm working with first. We have blog post. So in the book, they made a my blog API. And so a couple changes I'm going to do is, first, I don't like using the word my in my code, because otherwise you use that everywhere. I mean, everything in here belongs to me, so why would I put my in there? So I'm going to call it I blog post repo instead of I my blog API. We're going to make this public, and all we're going to put in here are basically So, with our blog, we're going to want to be able to, if we think about the CRUD methods we need, and so basically what we're going to put in, what we put in a repo are our CRUD methods: create, retrieve, update, and delete. So we probably want something to get all of our blog posts. And we're going to make these asynchronous methods so they will return a task. And within the generic for that task, we're going to say, we're going to put in what we're going to return. So this is going to be a list of blog posts. And when we get our blog posts, there's a number of ways of doing this, but eventually we could have a lot of blog posts. So we don't want to get all of the blog posts all the time. We're going to use a skip and take method, and we're going to say we're going to put in number of posts that we want to get, and then we're going to put in the start index from which we are going to get our posts from. And since this is an interface, we don't need to say public, and we don't need to say async. We just put in that this is going to return that kind of a task. And we're going to provide the ability to retrieve a number of them, and we probably should have one that gets a single blog post. And sure, get blog post by ID async. We'll provide an ID and we will get one of them. Oh, actually, yes, it is a string. So because our ID, our data items have a string ID, we need this to be brought in by string. And then so that's retrieve. We need a create method. So the create method will look like this. And it may seem weird that we're returning a blog post with a blog post, but remember, this is going to set, when we save this blog post, it's going to set the unique ID. So we want to return the blog post with that unique ID. So there's our create. Yeah, we'll need a delete. And our delete is just going to delete it, so we can just do it that way. And we need create, retrieve, up, and then we need an update. And there's a couple ways we could do this. We can actually combine the create and the update with the save method. Or we can have a separate update method. And there's a lot of good reasons to do the save and update together. So I'm going to say that we're going to do our create and our update here together. So that gives us our CRUD methods. Getting multiple blog posts, getting a single blog post, save a blog post, which will save it if we'll save a new one if it's new, or update it if it's new, and then delete so we can actually remove blog posts. And if we're just dealing with blog posts, so I'm going to get rid of these comments now because they kind of are pretty self-explanatory. And that shows you that if we're just talking about one table, there's not a whole lot in here. Now we want to implement that, so we create and they're putting all the API on one content. Because we're going to have multiple APIs, which are really repos, I'm going to add a folder called repos, and then I'm going to add a class called blog post repo. And this is going to implement iBlog post repo. I'm going to implement the interface and because I've got that interface, it'll stub out all of these methods. And let's put it in a little better order. I think the delete should come at the end. So now, how do we get these blog posts? Well, we need reference now to this application DB context, as I was saying before. And we're going to do that with a constructor up here. And in our constructor, we are going to bring in an IDB context factory. And we're going to bring in this factory, and so when we construct this repo, we are going to need a reference to this factory. And you'll notice that the default puts an underscore here. And I kind of like that it's a little bit more precise, because factory is kind of just very generic. I think it makes sense to use a little bit more descriptive name like this. So if we look at the book, they just say factory here, and they bring in a factory that way, and that works fine. And I know that this will end up resulting in longer code, but it kind of makes sense, I think. DB context factory. And we're only really going to reference this at the top, so we might as well. Because what we do next is up here, we use that fact, we can we use that DB context factory to create DB context. If we remember, our application DB context factory has a create DB context class, and this is where we can create that. And here, I think I will, within here, I'll just name it context. And so now that we have this context, what you'll notice is we have a bunch of methods to update, to remove, to add. So we can work with our with all of our attributes, and then also our DB sets. So we should have a blog context in here. There's our blog posts, there's our categories, and there's our tags. So this gives us access to all of the tables in the database. So now what I can do is I can go to my blog posts, and for this one where we're getting a bunch of them, what we're going to do is use a link to get access to our blog posts. So here I'm going to say blog posts, and I want them to be ordered in descending order. We're going to, using a lambda expression, we're going to order them by the publish date. And we're going to say skip oh, I'm in the wrong one. That goes in here. We're going to skip to the start index, and we're going to take whatever number of posts we ask. So this is the idea of, this will allow us to page through, because if we started at start index 10 and we took 10 posts, that would give us a second page if you had 10 at a time. And we're going to turn this into a list. Now, one other thing we need to do, so this will sort all of the blog posts in descending order. We're going to, and I kind of think actually I want to do this after I skip and take, because why? Oh no, I do need to do it beforehand. So I need to put them in order first, so that when I skip and take, it takes them in the appropriate order. So we do have to order first in this case. The other thing that I want to do is, let's see, do I have everything I need in here? Turn blog post, order by descending. We're going to go by publish date. Yeah, so that will give me everything I need, and we're just going to return this. So we're going to go to our blog posts. We're going to put them in descending order by the publish date. We're going to skip however many we say you skip, and then we're going to take that number, and that will give us our page of posts that we want. Up here, we're going to do something very similar. We are going to once again need to get our database context to start. And then what we will need to do is, again, make, also the other thing I want to do is I want to await this, which means that then I need to make this async. So I'm going to run this as an asynchronous, and this goes up here. So now we're going to keep putting it in the wrong place, right here. We're going to make this asynchronous call to get this as a list. And if you have an await, you need to declare the method as asynchronous, so that C# knows that we're going to be waiting for a result from this. So this tells C# to run this as an asynchronous method. We're going to do the same thing up here. We're going to go to our context. We're going to go to our blog posts. And in this case, we are going to pick the blog post where again using the lambda expression, post.id is equal to this ID that we've passed in, and we're going to want the first or default. The default, by the way, is a null. So and since this can return a null, this probably should also be a nullable item. So put a question mark there, which means that this could return a null. And since we need that to be a null, we are going to then need to go back to our interface, make sure that matches up. And I actually think we probably will want to do that with all of these. And to keep these things in the same order, I'm going to move them like this. So this will be the same order that we put them in the interface. So we have our get multiples, we have our get individual blog posts, and now we need to save a blog post. The save is going to be done with the context again. We need to have a context. So since we're at it, I'm going to do it with both of these. And now to save a blog post, we're going to say context dot go to my blog post and just add a blog post. And we can, since we need to return one, we can, let's do the asynchronous version of this. And actually, we need to do this a little bit more complex. So let's do it this, because I realize actually this save blog post may be dealing with an instance where this is a new blog post or not a new one. So how do we figure that out? Well, if we look at our model, and specifically our base class, we notice that when we create a new one, we've set it up to be an empty string. And we talked about that earlier, why that might be necessary. And this is where that becomes important, because if it's a brand new blog post, then post.id will equal an empty string. So we can use that here to say this is a new blog post. So if it's a new blog post, then we will just do the following. We're going to take our context dot add that blog post. If it's an existing blog post, then we need to get the one in the database. So right now we have the one that's coming in here. And maybe what I'll do is, oh no, we'll just leave it that way. I was going to put new blog post, but it may be an existing one. So what we need to do is, if it isn't an empty string, that means that we have an existing blog post, and we're going to do that by going to our context. And the way Entity Framework works is it keeps track of where objects come from. We don't know if this blog post originally came from the database. It may have been instantiated brand new. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this. We're going to say context entry blog post dot state equals entity state dot modified. And what that does is it says, hey, treat this as an original object in the database, and you know, it's going to use its ID field to associate it, and just treat it as modified. And then once we have that, now we have, if it's a new one, this will add it and set its state to modified. If it's an existing one, it will take this blog post and set it to modified. And then what we're going to do is await, and we're going to go to our context, and there's a save changes async method. And what this will do is this will actually make the changes to the database. And then what we want to do is return that blog post. So if it was this one was added, this blog post will then have the new ID. And then the delete is done this way. We just get our context, and then we can say context dot remove and actually I don't want an ID, I want to do this. We could do it with an ID, but let's actually bring in a whole blog post, and that means we also need to change it here. The reason I'm doing that is often when we're doing a delete, we have a whole object, and it is probably easier just to go ahead and remove, is just have access to
to the whole object, and we can remove the blog post here. And again, we're going to do a save changes async to so this will temporarily remove from the context. The save changes will actually make it happen in the actual database. So now we have our insert, update, and delete methods for our blog repo. And that's one down, and we'll need to do the rest. So now we can make repos for the other two classes as well. So we're going to make a category repo. And we should make an interface for that as well. And just like we did for the iBlog repo, we're going to put our CRUD methods in here. And they're going to be somewhat similar, so I'm just going to bring these over so that we can look at both of them simultaneously. And you don't always necessarily have these exactly the same. It depends on what you're doing. In this case, for example, in this one, we're going to bring back a list of category. We're going to have a get categories. I'm not going to do a skip and take on this one because I don't think I'm going to get that many categories. If later on I determine that I need that, I might do that later. But and then I'll just go through here, and I want a method to return just a category, and this should be a string because we're using goods. And then we're going to want to save a category, and we will pass in a category to save with that one, and delete a category, and this one we're going to pass in a category to delete. I suppose I made these nullable. That way we can return a null if we don't find one. And so now I've got my interface, and like I said, it looks very similar to the blog repo category. And so my category repo is going to implement the interface I made for it. And again, we are going to do the same thing as we did with our blog post repo, where we're going to, in fact, I can just about copy that constructor. So we're getting this, we're going to inject our DB context here. And just like we did with our blog post, we're going to start off each one of these by using our DB context factory to make a context, which you can then use to access the actual database. So in this case, we're going to go to the context, we're going to go to categories, and since we're getting all of them, it actually becomes much simpler, because all we need to do is say toList async, and we'll just return that. So this is going to get all of our categories, and we might want to order by, and we can say, so we have a category, we're using a Lambda expression, we'll order by maybe the name. That way they are alphabetical by name. And then if we just want to get one, we're going to go to our context, and we're going to go to categories. We're going to put in a where clause, where category goes to c.id is equal to the ID that was passed in as a parameter. And we're going to get first or default async. Since default is null, that's why it made this nullable. And then our save category, again, we need to see if it's a brand new category. So we're going to check to see if the category.id is equal to an empty string. If it's an empty string, that means it's brand new. So in that case, we will add a category, just like we did here with our repo. And here, you can do it either way. You can add an object directly to the context, but I think it may be faster if you tell it that this is actually going to be added to blog post. It may reduce some figuring some things out. So here we're going to, if it's a brand new one, we're just going to do an add. If it's not, that means that it's one that we need to update. So we're going to do what we did here. We're going to set its entity state to modified. So context.categories, so we did that. Context.entry. I don't know if telling it the type helps, but we'll do it. So we're going to change its state to modified, and then we can save changes. We want to await that. And then we'll return that category so that whatever calls the save method will get back the current version. Mostly just so that when we add it, we get the ID set. Oh, one other thing. Since we are creating a new one, we actually have, and since we're using GUID, we actually have to set the GUID specifically. So both in the blog post repo and there we need to add we need to set the GUID. So blog post dot ID is equal to GUID dot new GUID dot toString. So this will establish a new unique ID. And then with the delete, we just say context let's put it in await context dot let's see how we did with the blog posts. Oh, we have to do it with the save changes. Okay, so we remove it and then we save changes. So that's our category repo, and then we need to do another one for our tag repo. And of course, just like we did with the other ones, we're going to add an interface. We have the ID, and then let's see, keep ID then. We're going to have a save method and a delete tag, and again, we're going to modify what they give you by putting in a tag. We want this to be nullable. And that, again, so we made an interface with the methods that we want. And then in our tag repo, we're going to do the same thing as we did before. Hit Control dot, implement that interface, move this down to the bottom, and same kind of constructor. In fact, we're copying this makes it suggest that we could probably put a base class, but constructors don't really inherit well with the base classes, so I don't know that we necessarily need to do that. Oops, did I modify the wrong one? I did. There we go. So we're injecting again the DB context factory, and just like up here, we're going to, at the beginning of each of our methods, get hold of the database context. And once we have the context, get tag, let's see, yeah, get tag by ID is just going to be context or return. I'm going to go to context dot tags dot the where clause in here, where tag goes to tag.id is equal to that ID. So we'll get the first or the default, which could be a null, so that's why this is nullable. And then the same thing here. We'll order by the name, and we'll turn this into a list asynchronously. And then saving the tag, we've got to do the same thing. If tag.id is equal to an empty string, that means it's a new one. So if it's a new one, then we will we're going to add the tag. But before we do that, we're going to say tag.id is equal to good, new good to string, and else that means it's one that's already in the database. So what we really need to do is update it. So we're going to say entry of tag dots state. Set it to modified, so that then when we do our Okay, so that's our save and update. And then we have our delete. Notice that when I put I wait, sometimes IntelliSync will take care of putting the async up there for me automatically. So there we go. Same thing. And I think I'm going to clean up some of these using directives. And we have our repos done. Now that our data is set up, we need to create a way of viewing this data. And so let's run this just initially, see where we're at. Okay, so we are working. And I think what we want to do is we don't need these two fields. So let's start off by cleaning this up a little bit. We're going to leave our home as a welcome, but let's get rid of this counter and this fetch data. And actually we'll repurpose this fetch data for our blogs. So let's take a look at that. So I'll close this, and where that, so now we're going to be working in the client side. If we look at our pages, we have index.razor, which is actually our welcome page. So I'm going to get rid of this survey prompt, and just so that you can see what I'm removing as I'm removing it. This survey prompt goes to a survey about that. So we're going to repurpose this for our application. So I'll change this to I'll save that. And we should see if I refresh this, it now says Rob's app up there. So this page title allows you to change the title in the header. And if you were to look at this from a inspection perspective, you would see that in the head block now, the title is actually changed up here. So this page title tag, which is not an HTML tag, you can tell it's a different color. That gets you to change the title. Let's see what else we want to do. and I don't want this survey prompt, so that will get rid of this thing down here. And so we just have now a rather simplistic welcome page. And where is this navigation? Well, the page actually starts off at the very top with index.html under www-root. And www-root is kind of like where you would put typical things that you would have on a regular HTML page. You can even see that the CSS is located in here. There's an icon that's in here. And so the things that you would normally put on your regular page, you can put in this root folder. And you'll notice that there's this app element here. And that app gets loaded from in this shared folder. Well, actually, if we look at app.razor, this Razor page gets turned into HTML and gets put in here. Now, the first top level here of this app page basically is designed so that when you're looking for a page on this site, if you don't find it, there's a default view that shows you not found. Again, there, notice that page title, and then it gives you a basically just alert, hey, there's nothing at that address. In fact, you can see that if I were to go to local 789 and go to nothing here, just make up something, you can see that this shows up in that page. So that's, and you can actually modify that if you want your sorry nothing's here to be different. If it is found, then it renders your view here. And notice a few things. It has this default layout equals type of main layout. Well, what's main layout? This is main layout. Main layout consists of a nav menu and then this main page. And body is located, I guess, in an article tag. And then there's this div, which has at the top row that has an about, a link to the about page. So this about here is in this div, which is the top row. And if you go there, it goes to Microsoft. I don't want it to go to Microsoft. I think, well, I'll leave it there for now. Eventually I need to update that to my own page. We'll keep that in mind. Both these go to the home page. And then you notice, so then where is this located? Well, this sidebar is pointing to this, and these are Blazor components, or Razor components. So everything that says .razor is a Razor component. Main nav menu is another Razor component. And so this nav menu Razor component is inside of this nav menu, of this main layout Razor component, which is inside of this app Razor component, which gets rendered here. So this is the top level, goes to app Razor. This creates your main page here, which is using this default main layout. And the main layout then has a nav menu, and this is the nav menu. And if you look at the way the nav menu is set out, this is a standard Bootstrap page. If you were to look at or navigation bar, if you were to look up Bootstrap navigation bar, you could see similarities between, here you have navbar toggler class, which is basically this little hamburger, the little hamburger button you get at the top of a page, and So if you look at this application, that if I bring this down small enough, you'll see that you get this button that brings down the navigation at the top. When you get large enough with Bootstrap, it puts the navigation wherever you choose to have it, in our case on the left side. And so there's a number of things in Bootstrap that allow us to have a response. This is what makes a page responsive. So if you're on a phone, it switches to the vertical menu, and if you're large enough, it'll put the sidebar menu. And there's a number of ways of configuring this. We can show that at a later time. But for now, just understand that navigation stuff is happening in this nav menu. And this provides you that toggle button that allows you to show the menu or not show the menu if you're in a smaller viewer, like a small phone. And then in here we have actually our menu, and you can see in here we have there's our home. This is a nav link is again this is a Blazor component that's in this case one that's provided to you by the system, and a nav link takes what you want it to show up with. In this case, they put in home. They put a little span in here, and they said class OI home. These little icons here are actually provided by this span, and by setting the class to OI, and then you can see here there's a lot of different ones that you can set. Plus is what ended up here. List rich ended up being used for fetch data. So what we could do is we could repurpose this. We could take this one out, and then we could change this one to be maybe our button to go to our blog page. If I save that and refresh this, well, actually it does it right away. You can see now I've got my blog page. And I don't want to go to this weather forecast page. I want to create a brand new blog page. So now we're in our workflow. Once I've got my link, I want to create a page. I'm going to add a page. And what you're adding is a razor component. So I'm going to add a razor component. And again, you see that .razor extension. I'm going to call this blog. And what differentiates a page from just a regular component is you can see, for example, the survey prompt component. You have some tags, you have a code block. But notice that the pages, for example, counter, has an @page directive. This is going to be the extension which will lead to this page. So in my blog, I'm going to add at the top, if this is a top level page, I'm going to add an @page directive. And I'm going to put a slash and whatever I want the extension from the URL to be for this. So I'm just going to put this for now, @blog. And what you'll find is now if I go to blog, let's save this, save everything, see if I can get it to refresh. I may need to rebuild. Oh, I think I'm in the wrong one. Let's try it again. Control F5. Okay, so I rebuilt it with the blog, with capital B blog. Maybe that was the problem. I don't think it was. In any case, I rebuilt it and now it's actually showing. So we have our page directive, and now we can see when we go to blog, it goes to blog. If we go to counter, it's going to go to the counter page. So this page directive is basically the extension on the URL here. Everything after the domain name, it uses that to decide which page to show you. So this is your request. It looks at this extension and then it picks the appropriate page based on that. So these pages should all have page directives on them that are in here. If it's just a component, you can put them under shared, or eventually we'll make some component libraries. There will be a whole separate project. But for now, just realize these pages are the top level pages of your application. And once we have that, now we have a blog page. And we want this to go to the blog page rather than fetch data. So what we can do is we can go to, let's close some of this out. We can go to our nav menu and notice how this nav link works. It has an href, and that href is basically the name of that page. So if I put blog, if I put this extension in here, that is used to make the href for what will eventually be this link. So this nav link component ends up becoming the anchor tag. So if I inspect this item here, blog, we can see this ends up being the href, you can see, goes to blog, and it's a relative reference. So with an href, if you don't put the domain name, it assumes you're going to the same domain, but with this extension. And that now means that we can go to our brand new blog page. So now let's improve our blog page. We're going to go to our blog page, and this is where we can start building our page. So, you know, if I put stuff in here and save it, it shows up in the page. And now we can we're basically using everything you know for HTML will work in here. So if we wanted to display our blog, we would probably do, you know, we might do something like this. We might have an unordered list, and then we would have and these would eventually become our blog items. And it would end up looking like this. We might even then inside of here make it so that we would have an H2, which would be blog title, and a paragraph tag with blog text. And you can see that this is slowly evolving towards something that looks more like a blog. Well, we'd like this to be styled a little better. So let's go look at Bootstrap and blog and just see if we can find something. And there's this site called start Bootstrap, which has some free themes, and we actually have an example, and you can actually go view the source code in GitHub, and it shows you how to. And so we can this is open source, so we can look at this and start and use maybe some of this. So let's see, JavaScript. We don't want source. We want actually it should be in source. Ah, there we go. So we're going to look at this, just going to look at the index. And, okay, there's their nav. We could actually use their nav if we wanted to, but I just want to look at how they format an item. And we can see in here, this is actually where their main content is. And maybe what I might do is I might just grab this and go into here. And just save that. Just see what this ends up looking like. Oh, there we go. Okay, so it did come up. So we can see here, it's kind of looking more blog-like. Posted by here on this date. We have a link. It probably goes, yeah, it's broken because it's on our page now. So we can use that and to kind of figure out our formatting. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove everything. I'm going to leave a divider in and just try to get it down to one. Post preview, divider, post preview, divider. So this is one instance. Save that, and we can see now we have one instance where we have a title, a link, and so now I don't have a subtitle, so I'm going to actually get rid of this subtitle. And I think what I want is I do want the date. This will eventually be a link, and this will be the title. So how do I display multiples of these and do it automatically with our database? Okay, so we're going to need to bring our database in now. So we're using WebAssembly. And so this changes things up a little bit. If we were using Blazor Server, actually what would happen is everything would be done on the server side, and just changes would be automatically be sent to the client. But in our case, our application is going to be running on actually in the user's browser. And so we actually need to present our data to our front end, our Blazor client, through a server, through a web API to the server. And so what ends up happening is we have our app data, which is really just our database, a project that allows us to talk to the database. And then we have this this server. This server is actually offering up what's called a web API. In fact, when we run, this console application shows up as actually this server that's running. And there's not much being offered up by this server right now. In fact, I don't think... yeah, we have this weather forecast controller, which is has our... and this is... that weather data that was shown up originally is actually being generated by this controller. So we need to have a controller like this for our application to use. And so we're going to go to our browser and we're going to add a controller. And we are going to want an API controller. And there's several different ones that we could use here. Let's try this one with Entity Framework and just see what it provides us. I forget what the defaults look like. And so we'll make one to get to our blog. Our data context class, let's see if we see it. Oh, yeah, this is going to be not as clean to use with the template. So let's just add this one, API controller with Entity Framework. Let's try that. So with the blog, it doesn't see my data context class. And I think it's because we don't have a reference from our server to our data yet. So we need server to see data. And the way we do that is we go to our dependencies, add a project reference, and add a reference to data. Now let's see if it sees it. So we're going to add API controller with Entity Framework. There, now it sees our DB context. And we are going to pick up blog. Is that the right one? Blog post, I think. Yeah, from models. That's what we want. And we're going to call it blog post controller. That sounds good. We'll add it. And we'll see what the defaults show up. Sometimes these templates work okay, sometimes they don't. Okay, it didn't work. So we're going to actually, let's see if we can see it. We're going to add a context. 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 We're going to add just build an empty API controller. And we'll build it from scratch. So the way the controller works is we have these are called attributes, and they're basically compiler directives telling the C# compiler how to build something. And in particular, this one is providing a route to the controller. With this square braces, it's saying, hey, we could actually explicitly do this. But with the square brace, what it's saying is, hey, just name it whatever the name of this controller class is, but use, and by convention, it's not going to add controller. This will actually be API blog posts will be the URL to get to this API. And this inherits from the controller base class. And there's attributes saying this is an API controller. And that's going to make it work as an API controller. And you can see here, we have the same thing. There, they didn't put API / next to theirs, but that'll be fine. So now what we want to do is, with an API controller, so you have a class, you then have these methods that you write, which are actually your these will return whatever it is that you want to get. So in this case, we're going to make one to get our blog posts. And so I'm going to go to this. I'm going to copy that just because it's got the template. And we're going to return an IEnumerable of blog posts. We're going to have to add the using directive. So we're going to add a reference to our data projects models class. And we're saying when you get a request to API blog posts, and it's a GET, what it's going to do is we want to return we want to return our blog posts. So the way we're going to get that is we need to get access to our controller, or we have to get access to our repo. So we need an instance of this repo here, blog post repo, in order to work. How do we get that? Well, we're going to inject that in with our constructor. And we have that interface. So we're going to use that interface, iBlogPostRepo, blog post repo. And what we're going to do here is we're going to make an iBlogPostRepo property, or not property, a private field that these can all get access to. And so this will, at some point, we're going to be inserting a blog post here. Well, how do we get that in there? Well, what we do is in our server under program.cs, So here in program.cs of our server, we will do the following. Builder. I'm going to put a comment here. Add repos. Builder.services. Add. First, we're going to need the DB context factory. So we're going to add that, and we're going to say options go to options.use Sqlite and we want to use the name of our so this will point to where our database is. Oh, forgot to close this. Okay, now we're good. So and let's see, what's it complaining about? Okay, this needs to be the reference to the actual application DB context. And you can, so that options is this options right here. So that adds the application DB context itself. The next thing we want to do is add our repos. So we're going to say builder services dot add scoped. And you have, with services, you have several add methods. You have add singleton, add scoped, add transient. And so Singleton will add one item, and it'll keep that item alive throughout the entire lifecycle of the application. We probably don't want that for something like these data services, which we just want to open up, use them, and put them away. Transient will basically open up once per class or per object instance, and then add scoped. We'll keep it alive over the time where it's basically relevant. So we are going to use add scoped, and we're going to add an iBlog repo, and the repo we're going to add is the blog post repo. So you're going to put two types in here. The first one is the abstract interface. The second one is the actual concrete class that this add scope method will this add scope method will instantiate a concrete blog post whenever a class is demanding an iBlog post repo. So here we're asking for it's associating blog post repo with this iRepo. And then in our blog post controller here in our constructor, what happens is we're saying, hey, dependency injection system, we need an iBlog post repo, and put it in this variable name. And so because we registered this with the services class, it will instantiate one of these and inject them into here. Now that seems kind of complicated because we could just new one up in here, right? There's a reason for that for testing, which we'll discover later. But for now, just note that that's how we bring this in. So now we have our blog post repo. We can now use our blog post repos get blog posts async method. And we will, let's say we just get 10 initially with this. So this will get, well, first off, we need to oh no, I think we should see it. Number of posts. So let's get 10 posts with a starting index of 0. And since it's async, we want to await it. And since we're awaiting it, we'll make the method async. And so now this will use that. We did all the hard work in the blog post repo to get the blog posts. So this will return them. Now what does this do? So let's run this and see what happens. We're not going to see anything yet in the page. And let's see if we can find it. But this controller basically says that if we go to API blog posts, okay, so we're pinging the database, but it says no such table blog posts because we haven't made the database yet. So let's go to, let's open up a terminal for our data. So in the same folder where we have our migrations, I'm going to say .NET EF. And let's see, and then update. Oh. Database update. Okay, so now what we can do is, let's see, dir. There's a database. And so it ends up creating a database in our data folder. The problem with that is that it's not exactly where we might want it to be. It would be nice if this database, because we need it referenced from the server. I mean, we can go up and down into this, but I think we want it actually to be rather than being here. It'd be nice if it was up here where all of these projects could actually see it. So what we could do is we could change, if we go to our application DB context, we could say go up one directory to make this. So I'm going to save that. And I'm going to delete that one that was created. And then I'm going to rerun this command. And we can see that it's no longer in here, but if I go up one directory, there's my database, the same level as all my folders. So you may need to control where that ends up. And I'm going to run this. And I have my DB browser for Sqlite. And you can see there's all of our tables that are created. And if we look at blog posts, if it'll let me, or if we go to browse data, I'm going to go to blog posts, and we have all of these. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll put in some test ones. Oh, yeah, that's right. I need to do this a little differently. These are I was filling in the filters. That doesn't do any good. So I'm going to insert a table item. And hopefully that will work. Let's write our changes. And so we have a couple blog posts in here. Okay, so now we need to ping this blog post from this controller. This controller is using this program.cs here. And I think actually we just need to go up one. So I'm going to... So this should be able to go up one from this project to get to our app. We'll see if it actually finds it there. So let's run this now and see if we can get our API to work. And there we go. Here we are going to our blog post, and now our API is working. You'll notice that what this is a JSON object. And the way JSON works is these square braces mean that this is a list. Within here there's one blog post with a date, and here's a second blog post with a date on the second. This is blog post 1, blog post 2. So we are in fact getting information from this API. So when the user, so this is set up so that anyone on the web could go to this blog post and get this data just by sending this request in. Now, the next thing that we want to do is make it so that our page that we created on the client can now use that. So how do we get that data? Okay, so now we saw that we could get the data from just sending a URL request, and it came back as a JSON object. So we need to get that into this blog. We're going to, in order to do that, we need something called a we need a HTTP client. So at inject so we're going to put this code in to inject an HTTP client. And then here, so we're going to put in the onInitialize lifecycle event here. So if I put override you put override start typing, you can get the lifecycle events. We're going to be doing this asynchronously, so we're going to say onInitialized async. And it'll stub this out here. So protected override async. And this method gets called when you when the page gets initialized. And so what I want to do is I want to get that data. So I'm going to say var result is equal to await HTTP, and we need our client. So this, actually, I'm going to call this HT, the way Microsoft does it. I'm going to put HTTP. So that's our HTTP client, and we're going to HTTP client has a number of gets, and if we could actually get a string, it would get the whole thing as a string, but it has these convenient functions. For example, get from JSON async, and I think we're going to get this as a list of blog post. Which means that we need a reference to that. And that means that our client needs to be able to see these models here, this blog post model here. So again, we're going to go to our dependencies and add a reference. Get access to data. Click OK. I don't know if it gives, yeah, we need, and then we'll add our using directive. Notice how the using directives show up in a Blazor page. They're with an @using directive. That gives us access to, so now we have a list of blog posts, and then we need to put the location. So in this case, it'll be API blog posts, which is this in place of controller, and that's that route is what we're using now in our Blazor page to go out and go to our blog. And so we don't know what this looks like at this point. We know it's a list of blog posts, and I think we're just going to run in debug mode and just see what this ends up looking like. So let's close this one down completely, make sure it's gone. And then let's run in debug mode, and we'll stop here and see what this returns. Okay, so now that we have this, we're going to go to our blog post page, and let's see if the... Okay, running in debug mode, and let's see what we've got. So if we can see, we do in fact get our two blog posts. So now they're sitting here a result. So that worked, and the next step then is to now use this. So the way we can use this is we need to provide a property here so that we can preserve these at the class level. Because of course, once this method closes, this variable that I created inside here will disappear. So now, once onInitialize is done, we still have the blog posts here. And then what we'll do is we need to list them. So let's make an unordered list. And this is where we can start using Razor code. So with Razor code, I can put an @ and I can start using C# right in my HTML essentially. And so I'm going to do a for each, and I'm going to do a for each, and let's make it shorter. We'll say post in blog posts. And then what I can do is I'm going to make a list item. So I'm back to HTML, and then I put an @ saying I want to go back to C#, and I can put in post dot, and for now I'm just going to put the title. So I'll just list the titles of the blog post in a list item just to see if that works. And so now I'll hit Control F5, and let's see what we get. And I go to blog, and there we have blog post 1 and blog post 2. Let's see, I've got an error. I'll hit F12 and look at the error. I wonder what it was. We've got a null reference somewhere on line 7. So what would we get a null reference for on line 7? I think what happened is that initially when we loaded in here, blog post was null. So we actually do, what we often have to do in things like this is we have to put in a null reference tag. So what we'll do is we'll put in here, if blog posts does not equal null, then we will do all this stuff. And there's a number of ways we could handle this, right? We could have made we could have initialized blog post to a we could have put a new statement right here when we initialized it, but this works too. So now we don't get the null reference exception. So we've cleared that out by putting that null check in here. But of course, this doesn't look great for our blog post. We want it to look like this stuff down here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this, and this is really our blog post. Or actually, I think these are each of our individual blog posts. We have a row, and then, so let me see what would happen if I put two of, although we did see that, I think we saw that when we had multiples, they were just these things repeated. So what we could do is we could take this. This goes in front of here. And we don't need this UL because we're using their formatting instead. We take this part after the divider, and that goes after the for each. And then these items go inside of the for each. We don't want a list item, so we'll take that out. And the title would go into that. So let's save that and see how that turns out. Looking a little better. So now this is our titles that we had, and we can just go in here and say, well, this will be posted by, and it's me, so I'm just going to be, I really don't need the posted by part. I think I'm just going to put posted on. And then this becomes at post dot publish date dot toString, and let's see, I'll pick a format. What's D? D's fine. We'll pick that one for now. And so this is pulling the publish date from the post. This is pulling the title. And this is what we've got. We've actually got, now we don't have the links working yet, but we have this page where we can add posts. So we now have our blog post. Now the link here, which is based off the title, we needed to go to a page, and so we're going to need a blog post page, which is what we'll do next. The next step then is we need to create a blog post page that we can look at the actual blog post on. So I'm going to add a new Razor component, and we have blog, so maybe we'll call this one blog post. And again, we're going to, just like we did before, we're going to add an @page directive. And this is going to show a blog post. Well, one of the things that we need is we need an ID. And the way we can do that is we can bring in an ID through a link up here. Let's see. And so what this says is that when you come to this page, you also need to provide an ID field. And we're going to provide a property that will show the field. And we'll decorate that with the @parameter attribute. And I think we're going to make this nullable as well, because it could not have something. And just so we can see what this ends up with, we're going to put a paragraph tag here, and we'll just say, just display this ID. That's strange. Let's just do a rebuild. Oh, okay. So this is a common problem. Because I named my my page blog post, now this thinks that this blog post is not referring to my model class, but this blog post. So one of the things I recommend doing is actually putting the word page on anything that's a Razor page or Razor document that's going to be a page. Okay, that fixed that. And okay, now we'll run this, Control F5, and see what we get. And so here's our blog. I want to see what, so there's our blog. If I click on these, I don't think it's going to have a great result yet because it's going to post.html. We need to fix that because now it's, where we want to go to is blog post and then, some string. And you can see that this string now is showing up here under blog post, and so that whatever I type here ends up being passed from this attribute here into this parameter now because this is ID and we have this property called ID. So this is a way of getting from the something from the URL into our code on the page. So now that, and once we have that, then we can use that to find, eventually to find our page. So this should have gone to a blog post. But we also need the ID here. So we'll need to insert so we create this problem here where when we all right, this gets our star blog posts. I'm sorry. Here, this href right now is just going to post.html. So we need this to actually end up being a reference to our blog post. So let's change that to blog post first off. And I'm just going to put blah just to see what that would do. So we go to our blog, we click on our blog post, and we can see that, okay, well, that works. That went to a blog post, but we got blah. We don't want blah. What we want is we want the ID of the post. So we just simply put @post.id. And this will insert the ID. So now when we run this, let's see what happens. Now we go to the blog. We go to blog post 2. And it's grabbing the ID field from the blog. I'm kind of curious that the blogs are... Oh, I guess because, well... Yeah, I'm why they're... Oh, okay, so Sqlite is actually injecting IDs of... It's not using GUIDs, it's using IDs. And so it's not using my GUID. We'll have to fix that. But for now, we can see that we can go to our links and we can get, and it goes actually to this ID. So then the next thing to do is see if we can use that in our blog page. So I'm going to override the on initialized event again. We'll make it async and just await the base initialize. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to so we need our blog post. So let's make a blog post added my using directive. And then in here, what we can do is say post, and we are going to need to go to our API server to get our blog post. Now, right now, we have a method to get all our blog posts. And so we need a way of doing something like this. Be able to bring in an ID field and then using the get so now this will return, this one will return one blog post. And because we could get a null, I'm making this nullable. So this will get one blog post. But we have a problem, because if I put a get here, it's going to assume that I'm going to the same location. So there's nothing that differentiates this one from this one on the API. So we're going to add a route and this will be API blog post slash and then we're going to again put an ID in here. So when we get to this route, it's going to use this ID to get the blog post associated with this ID. And in here, wait, what am I doing? Oh, I messed up the wrong one. So I'm going to make it singular, and I'm going to make it with an ID attribute. So this will end up in here, and then I'll pass that into the blog post, and we should be able to get a single blog post. This hot reload doesn't really help you much, so I'm going to turn it off. And just to test it out, I'm going to put a stop point in here. And then in our page here, we're going to do something kind of similar to what we did with the overall blog. But we're just going to get one. And let's see, post.id. Or actually just ID. So this will take whatever came in on the ID field, we'll pass it in here, and construct a reference to this API request, which will send this ID that we got on the request for this page to our API, which will then go to our repository to pull the data from the database, return it, it'll come back to this page and be placed in post. And then here, and just so we can see if we got something, let's just say post.title. At post.title. Oh, and then of course we also need to inject our HTTP client into our blog post page because it is in fact using that. So let's try this again. Let's see what they don't like this time. Oh, and then again, this is, we're just getting one blog post. Okay, that looked like that took off. Let's see if this works. We go to blog. We have our blogs. I go to blog post 2, and we got an error. So we have a error, null reference on line 8. So try to go to title and post doesn't exist yet. So once again, we have to do a null reference check. So we'll say if post does not equal null, then we can do this. Otherwise we can't. So then let's try that again. And if we, okay, so now we are at blog post 2, and we have an invalid JSON. Interesting. So let's see what we're getting out of here. So I'll put a stop point here and run in debug mode. So we're going to ID with a string of 2. Let's step over. And we're actually getting an error with a problem here. So let's do this. Let's go to the API blog post 2 and see what that returns. So our API is actually, our problem is actually with our controller. This is not resolving to, so API blog post with an ID doesn't seem to be hitting this route. And I think it's because we doubled this up. I think if I were to then actually go to API / blog posts / API, then it hits it. Okay, so the problem we have is actually here. We need to, this already defines API blog posts. We can just do that. So let me do that, save it, and continue. Let's see if it recovers it, rebuild and apply changes. Let's stop all this and rerun it. Yep, now it's hitting this just fine. I'm going to continue. And look, we've got the one blog post. Okay, so it's now going to be blog posts two, and if we just do blog posts, we get the first 10 blog posts. So we're going to have to figure out a scheme to do this decently, because one of the problems is that at some point we need to insert into blog posts here the skip and take values, and this isn't going to work great yet. So what we can do though is, for now, we can get this fixed by putting blog posts and run the application, and I think we will have a functioning application. Let's take out the stop points because I think it's just going to work, and go to the blog, Go to blog post 2. You can see now we're seeing the info from blog post 2, blog post 1. We can see that. And now we can style this and make it look decent. So I don't need that ID here anymore. Why don't I put the title up here? Or actually, let's make this an H2. And then let's make a paragraph tag and at post dot text will go in here. And actually, let's make this an H3 and get rid of this H3. And we'll say, if it's null, we'll just put a loading. And maybe in parentheses, I'll put the post dot publish date toString and let's see what we've got. There's my blog. I'm going to blog. There's the title. Obviously, this could be, we can style this a little better, but we're starting to get, a functional blog. And that generally works. So now the next step is to add the ability to create and retrieve, and that will be a subject of a different day. So that kind of gets you into how getting a page started works, and generally how working with this kind of functions. And so if I was then to add another element, we go back through the whole cycle. What you end up doing is you create a model. You create a repo. You then create a controller to offer up the data, and then you, in fact, maybe we'll do that next. We'll pick up from these pages here where we are doing the categories and the tags. So we'll do those next.